much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's always an absolute pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Broxtowe. Some of what she says, I have to say I agree with. Certainly in relation to her remarks about my bill on dangerous driving, of course. I have to say I don't disagree with everything that the government are proposing in the bill, but I do have some real concerns about parts of the bill. Just in relation to civil liberties, for an example, I think Clause 12, which seeks to limit advice and assistance in a police station, is a mistake, and it's no good for the government to say, well, the previous government had proposals to do very similar things. I'm concerned about what this government are doing. Section 58, subsection 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act provides that people in a police station are entitled to legal advice from a solicitor, private consultation. That must absolutely remain in my view. Also, in relation to defence costs, I think it can be found in the bill under clause 52. This proposes to stop people recovering defence costs in Crown Court. So if they pay their own fees, they will be prevented from recovering those costs if they're successful at trial. I think that is a mistake. I'm concerned, Mr Deputy Speaker, about the government seemingly ignoring advice. Some of it's very good advice. I have to say the remarks made by the Honourable Member for Maidstone and the Weald made some absolutely superb remarks in relation to what she thinks the effects of the government plans are. But the government just seem to pass that off as irrelevant and not important. I think the Honourable Member for Broxtowe is saying that's not right. Well, I've seen it. The Bar Council have provided a very detailed proposal for alternative savings. I've seen no evidence of the government acknowledging the proposals. The Law Society as well. So when the Bar Council, my professional body, Mr Deputy Speaker, say that this is do-it-yourself justice, not access to justice, I have to agree with those remarks. Criminal solicitors, family solicitors, whatever the practice, are bound to want to protect themselves from what are cuts to their businesses. Of course they would. But in my experience, publicly funded lawyers do what they do not for money. They do it because they want to help people. They want to assist people. They want to give advice to people and protect them from what is very often very complex law. Lawyers always say law's very complex. We're bound to do. I say it constantly. I say it to myself even. You know, trying to convince myself it's very complex, but it really is difficult and complex. The procedure is often very complicated. Lay people struggle with the most basic proceedings, and I have real concerns about the government's agenda. And it really truly is the most vulnerable people that will suffer the consequences of the government proposals. Let's look at the areas which are outside of the scope. Clinical negligence, legal help for criminal injuries compensation, debt. This is only a few, Mr Deputy Speaker. Education, employment. It just seems to me madness. To provide advice and assistance in employment situations saves money in the long run. That is a fact. If a client goes to a solicitor, an employment solicitor who's very experienced with instructions about a case, the solicitor is very often the filter to prevent them from completing, I think it's called an ET1 nowadays, completing the ET1 and getting it to a tribunal. So it prevents costs in the long run. The government have failed to recognise these points. Yes.
The Honourable Gentleman gave away. With regards to the employment tribunals, at the moment what you have with employment tribunals, they do not have the power to order cost. What about the situation where you have somebody making a malicious claim and somebody defending their character, fighting all the way, but they can't have costs being given to them at the end? Does he think that needs to change?
Well, I'm not sure whether I do. I don't think I've got the time to consider the point the honourable member makes properly to give him a fair answer. But what does concern me is the government are seeking to save money by not providing advice and assistance at this early stage. They will cost themselves much more in the long run. Housing law, welfare benefits, the most vulnerable in society, suffering the most. Nicholas Green QC, the former chairman of the Bar Council, says this: the government has failed to listen to the views expressed by many in the judiciary, the legal profession and voluntary organisations in formulating its proposals on legal aid. Legal aid will be withdrawn from whole swathes of areas of law and access to justice will be systematically deprived. I agree entirely with those remarks. This is not someone with an axe to grind. This is someone who's been in the profession for a terribly long time. Somebody who ought to be, Mr Deputy Speaker, respected for his professional opinion. I could mention lots of solicitors in my area who have contacted me in recent days to warn me of the dangers about access to justice. And I say this, and I mean it sincerely. They don't make these points to me because they're worried about not buying the next flash car. They do it because they represent people and they care about those clients. Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker.